It may have been for beer money or some kind of a lawsuit.
And I said, well, New York Times, Washington Post.
Ellen DeGeneres used to be everywhere. She danced her way into our homes, made A-list celebrities laugh, and stood tall as a symbol of resilience and kindness. But today, at 67, she has disappeared quietly. But what really happened? Why did one of the most powerful women in entertainment suddenly walk away from it all? You've heard the headlines and the viral tweets. But what if we told you that's only the surface? Because the truth behind Ellen's fall from grace is anything but simple. And behind the smiles were cracks that widened over time until everything came crashing down. Now she's living thousands of miles away from Hollywood, almost unrecognizable, physically and emotionally. And when you see her, you'd be shocked. Early life struggles and rise to fame. Ellen DeGeneres was born on January 26, 1958, in Metairie, Louisiana, a small suburb of New Orleans. Her father, Elliot DeGeneres, worked as an insurance agent, while her mother, Betty DeGeneres, was a speech therapist. By most accounts, Ellen's childhood wasn't marked by wealth or luxury. She was raised in a modest, working-class household, and like many families in the South during the 1960s, her family lived paycheck to paycheck. There was love in the home. But it was clear from an early age that life wouldn't be handed to her easily. The first significant upheaval in Ellen's life came when she was just a teenager. Her parents divorced when she was 16 years old. Divorce is never easy, especially for children caught in the middle. And for Ellen, it created a deep emotional fracture that would linger quietly in the background for years. After the divorce, Ellen moved with her mother and her mother's new husband to Atlanta, Texas. The shift from the familiarity of her hometown to a new environment was jarring. Ellen would later say that she turned to humor as a way to help her mother cope with the pain. That act of emotional caretaking, as quiet and subtle as it was, became one of the earliest sparks of her passion for comedy. But the living conditions didn't make things any easier. Their new home in Texas was a small, dingy apartment. She was young, struggling to adjust, and wrestling with deep emotional questions about family, identity, and the direction of her life. However, despite the turmoil, Ellen finished high school and briefly enrolled at the University of New Orleans. She studied communication, but her stay there was short-lived, and just one semester in, she dropped out. College didn't feel right for her, not because she lacked ambition, but because she didn't yet know where her voice belonged. She needed to find herself in the real world, not inside a lecture hall. So, she went to work. She took on a long list of odd jobs, each more humbling than the last. She waited tables. She worked as a house painter. She even sold vacuum cleaners door to door. These jobs were not glamorous, but they taught her resilience. And they gave her a window into everyday people's lives, the kinds of people she would later connect with so naturally through her comedy and daytime television show. Most people don't realize that Ellen's entry into stand-up comedy didn't come with a big audition or a burst of fame. It was slow and often painful. She started by performing stand-up in small clubs and coffee shops around New Orleans, places where the audiences were more likely to heckle than laugh. She was told she wasn't funny enough, that her delivery was too soft, and that she needed to be more aggressive. But Ellen didn't want to copy other comics or force herself into a style that didn't feel authentic. She stuck to her quiet, quirky, observational humor. And over time, that voice became sharper. Her bits about the absurdities of everyday life started to resonate, and eventually, people began to notice. Her big break came in 1984 when she won the title of Funniest Person in America in a competition sponsored by Showtime. That exposure led to guest appearances on late-night shows and sitcoms. Slowly, her career began to build momentum. But even then, success wasn't instant or guaranteed. Ellen had to work twice as hard to prove herself, in an industry that didn't know what to do with a woman who wasn't conforming to the usual mold. She was awkward, sincere, a little shy, but undeniably funny. And eventually, the industry began to see her value. The turning point that would define her career, and in many ways her life, came when she landed her own sitcom, Ellen, on ABC. The show was modestly successful, but it became a historic piece of television in 1997 when Ellen made the decision to come out as gay, both in real life and as her character on the show. At the time, this was not only rare, it was extremely risky. Coming out publicly was still considered taboo for celebrities, especially those in mainstream television. But Ellen did it anyway. Her coming out made headlines around the world. It was groundbreaking and super brave, but it came at a massive personal and professional cost. After the infamous episode in which her character comes out to a therapist played by Oprah Winfrey, the show faced enormous backlash. Sponsors pulled out, conservative groups launched protests, and ratings declined. The following season of the show became more focused on queer community issues, which the network claimed made it too political. And not long after, the show was canceled. The cancellation wasn't just a business decision, it felt personal. Hollywood, which had briefly embraced Ellen's bravery, quickly distanced itself. She couldn't get meetings. No studio wanted to hire her. She lost her agent. And for the next several years, Ellen DeGeneres, who was once a rising star with her own primetime show, felt blacklisted from the industry. It was one of the darkest chapters of her life, and she eventually revealed that she fell into a deep depression during this time. She felt isolated, betrayed, and unsure if she'd ever work again. The entertainment world had punished her for being honest and for living her truth. However, through it all, she never walked back her decision. She never apologized for who she was. It wasn't until 2003, 6 long years after her sitcom was canceled, that Ellen found her second act. That year, she launched The Ellen DeGeneres Show, a daytime talk show that would become a cultural juggernaut. With its mix of humor, celebrity interviews, viral surprises, and inspirational stories, Ellen struck a chord with millions. She danced her way into people's living rooms and hearts. The show ran for 19 seasons, won dozens of Emmys, and turned Ellen into one of the most recognizable and beloved public figures in the world. The same industry that had once cast her out now couldn't get enough of her. She became a symbol of resilience, and she used her platform to promote kindness, to give back to those in need, and to make people laugh. And for a long time, it seemed like Ellen had truly rewritten her story. But fame is rarely simple, and Ellen's personal life, particularly her love life, would prove to be just as complex as her career journey. Because behind the smiles and the dancing, there was a private world few really understood. And while the headlines celebrate her high-profile romance with Portia de Rossi, the truth is, Ellen's journey through love wasn't always as joyful as it seemed. The love and loss that shaped Ellen. Before Ellen DeGeneres became a household name, there was a painful loss that would shape how she saw the world and how she loved. In her early 20s, while she was still living in a small, cramped apartment, struggling to make ends meet, and dreaming of becoming a stand-up comedian, Ellen was in a serious relationship with her first girlfriend, Kat Perkoff. They were young, in love, and quietly building a life together, even though same-sex relationships were still kept in the shadows. Ellen later shared that because they couldn't be open about their relationship, it added an extra layer of emotional pressure and tension to the relationship. But what happened next would change her life forever. They were going through a rough patch in their relationship, and they decided to meet at a concert to talk things out. However, after they failed to communicate properly, Perkoff left the venue, and on her way home, she was involved in a tragic car accident, and she never made it home. That moment shattered Ellen's world. She was young, heartbroken, and completely alone in her grief. She couldn't tell people the full story because she hadn't publicly come out yet, and so she had to mourn someone she loved in silence. In a later interview, she confessed, "It was hard because I didn't really get to grieve or acknowledge how devastating that was for me. Ellen spiraled and later admitted that she became deeply depressed after the accident. Unable to continue affording rent payment for the apartment she and Perkoff had shared, Ellen moved into a tiny apartment, barely furnished, with just a mattress on the floor and no heat. In that dark, quiet space, she began to question the meaning of everything. She even imagined conversations with God, asking why bad things happen to good people. She said, "I'm lying on the floor, wide awake, thinking, here's this beautiful girl, 23 years old, who's just gone. So I started writing what it would be like to call God and ask why fleas are here and this person is not." Out of that pain, Ellen wrote what would become her first stand-up comedy bit that eventually helped her get noticed in the comedy world. It was about that imagined conversation with God. She took her grief and turned it into something meaningful. That became her way of healing. Still, the emotional scar remained. That kind of early loss doesn't just disappear. It shapes how you protect your heart, how you build walls, how you look for safety and love moving forward. Years later, Ellen found that safety in someone who seemed to understand her in a deeper way. And that was actress Portia de Rossi. They met in 2001 at a party, but Portia was still closeted at the time. She later admitted that although she was immediately drawn to Ellen, she wasn't ready to come out or be open about her feelings. It would take her 3 more years before she could finally tell Ellen how she felt. In 2004, they began dating officially. By then, Ellen had already come out publicly and had survived the backlash that came with it. She was open, proud, and comfortable in her skin. Portia, on the other hand, was still battling years of fear and insecurity, both about her sexuality and her body image. Portia had spent most of her early career hiding who she was. She even changed her name and adopted an image that made her feel safe in Hollywood. But deep down, she was struggling and dealing with the intense pressure that comes with being a young female actress in a very judgmental industry. Loving Ellen didn't instantly solve all of that, but it gave Portia stability. Ellen became her rock, and for Ellen, Portia was the first person she truly let in after years of building emotional walls. They weren't just a couple, they were 2 women who had both been through deep personal battles and were now trying to create something steady together. In 2008, when same-sex marriage was briefly legalized in California, Ellen and Portia didn't waste any time. They got married that same year in a simple but beautiful ceremony at their Beverly Hills home. It was a powerful moment, not just for them, but for so many people watching. Their marriage was often held up as a shining example of a strong, supportive relationship in Hollywood. And for a long time, that image held true. They appeared at red carpet events, gave interviews about their life at home, and even worked together on several projects. Ellen would often speak glowingly about Portia on her talk show. Portia, in turn, would say Ellen made her feel safe to be herself. But, like all couples, their relationship had its struggles. There were periods where they admitted they needed space and time to work through personal issues. Portia later opened up about having gone through deep personal therapy to deal with her past traumas. Ellen also admitted in interviews that being famous and having their relationship constantly in the public eye added pressure. Every argument, every quiet phase, and every red carpet where they didn't appear together sparked rumors. Still, through all of it, they stayed together. Over the years, Portia has said that Ellen saved her life, not just emotionally, but in terms of helping her see herself in a new light. And Ellen often describes Portia as the most important person in her world. And for Ellen, who had started her adult life with a heartbreak so deep she couldn't talk about it, finding lasting love in a world that had once turned its back on her was no small victory. But even the strongest relationships can't shield you from the outside world, because as Ellen's fame grew, so did the scrutiny. The warm, kind public image she had built over the years would soon come under fire, and the controversies that followed would change everything, not just for her, but for how the world saw her. The controversies and accusations. For years, Ellen DeGeneres was seen as one of the most beloved figures in television. She danced into homes every weekday, made audiences laugh, and spread messages of kindness. But soon, that carefully polished image began to crack, and what spilled out shocked almost everyone. It started with quiet rumors and whispers in the industry, but by the middle of 2020, those murmurs exploded into full-blown headlines. Former employees and behind-the-scenes insiders from The Ellen DeGeneres Show came forward with disturbing allegations that painted a very different picture of the show's workplace and, more importantly, of Ellen herself. In July 2020, an explosive BuzzFeed News report dropped. Several former employees, most of whom spoke anonymously, accused The Ellen DeGeneres Show of being a toxic work environment. According to these former staffers, racism, intimidation, and fear were common behind the scenes. Some even claimed they were penalized for taking medical leave or bereavement days. But perhaps the most shocking claim was that the culture of fear ran so deep that many employees were scared to speak up, afraid that doing so would cost them their jobs. These weren't isolated complaints. They came from multiple people who had worked on the show at different times. Ellen herself wasn't directly accused of the day-to-day misconduct in this early wave of allegations, but critics quickly pointed out that as the face of the show, she was ultimately responsible for the environment her employees worked in. Shortly after the allegations, Ellen released a statement saying, "We take all of this very seriously, and we realize, as many in the world are learning, that we need to do better, are committed to doing better, and we will do better." However, shortly after the article made headlines, things got worse. This time, several high-level producers from the show were accused of serious misconduct, including inappropriate behavior. 3 top producers, including Ed Glavin, Kevin Lehman, and Jonathan Norman, were later fired after an internal investigation was launched into the claims. The studio tried to contain the fallout, but the damage was already done. For many fans, it felt like a betrayal. The Ellen DeGeneres Show had built its brand on kindness, laughter, and generosity. But now, people were questioning how much of that was real. As the controversy gained attention, more voices joined the conversation. This time, it wasn't just staffers. It was celebrities, comedians, and people who had crossed paths with Ellen over the years. Many started speaking up about how Ellen had treated them off camera. Some described her as cold and dismissive. Others said she had a reputation in the industry for being difficult, especially with people she didn't see as important. They claimed that behind the cheerful daytime persona was someone who could be surprisingly harsh. Several former employees even described a strict list of rules around how staff could interact with Ellen, while some even claimed that they were told not to speak to her directly unless spoken to. But that wasn't all, because the controversies and scandals didn't end there. In late 2019, before the BuzzFeed article, there was already one controversial moment that had raised eyebrows, and it was the now infamous interview between Ellen and actress Dakota Johnson. Ellen jokingly confronted Dakota for not inviting her to her birthday party, but Dakota pushed back and told Ellen that she was invited, and Ellen just didn't come. It was a brief, awkward exchange, but it went viral. For the first time, audiences saw Ellen get caught in a moment where the charm didn't quite land. And Dakota's calm but firm response sparked discussions about whether Ellen was always as genuine as she appeared. But that wasn't the only interview that raised questions. Over the years, several interviews on The Ellen Show had moments that now feel different in hindsight. In one interview with singer Mariah Carey, Ellen pushed her to reveal if she was pregnant by handing her a glass of champagne and insisting she take a sip. Mariah, clearly uncomfortable, tried to dodge the question. It was later revealed she was pregnant at the time but miscarried shortly after. Many fans called the moment insensitive, especially in such a public setting. Another awkward exchange happened with comedian Hassan Minhaj. Ellen repeatedly mispronounced his name even after he corrected her and joked about it. For some viewers, it seemed like a lighthearted moment. But for others, it reflected a deeper pattern of Ellen not being as respectful or self-aware as she claimed. Then came the pandemic. In March 2020, as the world went into lockdown, the Ellen DeGeneres show paused production like most other shows. Ellen began filming episodes from her home. But what the public didn't see was what was happening to her longtime crew behind the scenes. Reports emerged that many of her core staff, some of whom had worked on the show for years, were left in the dark. They weren't given clear information about their pay, their jobs, or whether they would return. Instead, Ellen reportedly hired a non-union film crew to help shoot the at-home episodes. The people who had helped build the show from the beginning felt abandoned. Some said they received little to no communication from producers for weeks. And while Ellen continued to film segments about kindness and staying positive, her own team was struggling just to get answers about their jobs. And then, almost out of nowhere, the public backlash found its voice. In March 2020, comedian Kevin Porter posted a tweet asking people to share stories about Ellen being one of the meanest people alive. A tweet that was clearly sarcastic in tone, but sparked something real. Within hours, hundreds of replies flooded in, and by the next day, thousands. People shared stories about working in restaurants where Ellen allegedly complained to managers. Others claimed she treated staff and service workers with disrespect. While not every story could be verified, the volume of them, combined with the earlier media reports, painted a clear picture that Ellen's public image was starting to fall apart. The tweet turned into a movement, the idea that someone who preached kindness every day could secretly be mean or dismissive hit a nerve with fans. Eventually, Ellen broke her silence. In a letter to her staff, she said she was sorry and admitted that things happened that should never have happened. She promised changes and said that she trusted others to run the show while she focused on being the on-air talent. But she was now taking more responsibility. When the show returned for its 18th season in September 2020, Ellen addressed the controversy in her opening monologue, where she admitted that things had gone wrong, but also insisted that she was still the person she'd always been. She said, "As you may have heard, this summer there were accusations of a toxic work environment at our show, and then there was an investigation. I learned that things happened here that never should have happened. I take that very seriously, and I want to say I am so sorry to the people who were affected." But while some applauded her for acknowledging the criticism, others felt it was too late. In 2021, Ellen announced that the Ellen DeGeneres Show would end after its 19th season. She said the decision had been in the works for a while, but few believed it had something to do with the backlash. After nearly 2 decades on air, the show that had once stood as a symbol of lighthearted fun and kindness was coming to a quiet close. Fame had given Ellen everything: a platform, a voice, and a legacy. But it had also come with a cost, and the very thing that had lifted her up had now turned on her. And as the world moved on from the scandal, Ellen stepped away from the spotlight. But behind the scenes, she was fighting another battle that had nothing to do with public opinion: health battles and mental struggles. As the cameras dimmed and the applause faded, Ellen DeGeneres found herself facing a much quieter and far more personal battle that had nothing to do with ratings or public image. Because beneath the sharp wit and big smile, her body and mind were sending signals that something wasn't right. And for the first time in her long public life, Ellen was forced to face her health head-on. Ellen took a bone density test, and she was informed that she had osteoporosis, a condition that weakens bones and makes them more prone to fractures. For someone who had spent years bounding across the stage and performing physical comedy routines, the news hit hard. She once joked in an interview about her condition, saying, "I don't even know how I'm standing up right now. I'm like a human sandcastle. I could disintegrate in the shower." It was her way of masking the fear. But behind the humor, there was real concern. Osteoporosis isn't just about brittle bones. It's a reminder of aging, limitations, and vulnerability. But it wasn't just her body that was changing. Her mind was too. Ellen has had to deal with memory loss, which she has attributed partly to aging, but also to the overwhelming stress she has endured, especially in recent years. After nearly 2 decades of producing daily television and dealing with mounting public pressure, her mental clarity had taken a hit. She joked about misplacing her phone or forgetting why she walked into a room, but underneath those jokes was a deep, unsettling fear that her mind wasn't as sharp as it once was. That wasn't all. Alongside her physical health diagnosis, Ellen also began experiencing the side effects of attention deficit/hyperactivity disorder, something she had never formally addressed until much later in life. She struggled to stay focused, bounced quickly from one thought to the next, and often found herself overwhelmed by even small tasks. It wasn't new behavior, but only recently did she begin to understand why she had always felt that way. Then came the diagnosis that surprised her the most: obsessive-compulsive disorder, also known as OCD. For years, Ellen had displayed traits that many around her noticed, including repetitive habits, obsessive cleanliness, and a need for things to be just right. However, she never thought much of it. It was just part of her personality, or so she thought. It wasn't until her talk show faced intense backlash in 2020 that she finally decided to seek therapy. She had grown up in a strict Christian Science household where mental health struggles were rarely discussed, let alone treated. In that faith, healing is often believed to come through prayer rather than medicine or therapy. For Ellen, this meant that for most of her life, she didn't even have the language to describe what she was going through. She simply believed she had to stay strong and positive. But as the public pressure mounted and the walls began to close in, she knew she couldn't manage it alone anymore. She entered therapy. Slowly, through long, honest conversations, she began to unpack decades of emotional weight. And that's when the OCD diagnosis came. Ellen later admitted that therapy wasn't easy. It forced her to revisit childhood traumas, past relationships, and the pressure she had put on herself to always appear upbeat and unshakable. But it also helped her accept that being strong didn't mean being silent. And for the first time, she began speaking openly, not just about the scandal that rocked her career, but about her own mental health journey. And for someone who had spent most of her life trying to please everyone, learning to prioritize herself was not easy. But it was necessary. These days, Ellen doesn't move at the same speed she used to. She doesn't push herself to be everywhere or please everyone. She keeps her circle smaller, her days quieter, and her mind as still as she can manage. So what does life actually look like now for one of the most talked about names in daytime history? The red carpets are gone. The cameras are off. But behind closed doors, Ellen DeGeneres is living a life that might surprise you. Ellen's life today. In a move that shocked even her closest fans, Ellen DeGeneres quietly left Hollywood behind. She made a simple decision to walk away from the world that had given her everything and, in many ways, taken just as much. After the end of The Ellen DeGeneres Show in 2022, and after Donald Trump was elected President of the United States, Ellen and her wife, Portia de Rossi, packed up their life in California and relocated to the English countryside. Yes, Ellen moved to the United Kingdom. Far from the studios, talk show lights, and fast-paced culture of Los Angeles, she traded luxury for simplicity. And by all accounts, it was not an easy adjustment. Ellen has since described her new life as strangely quiet and almost unrecognizable from what she used to know. Gone are the assistants, stylists, and packed schedules. These days, Ellen spends her time mowing her own lawn and learning how to live without constant attention. For someone who was used to the demands of daily television and a team handling her every need, these tasks have been humbling. She admits that some days are harder than others. The solitude at times feels deafening. And while the move was meant to bring peace, it also forced her to confront parts of herself she had long ignored. Physically, Ellen has changed too. She no longer wears her signature platinum blonde haircut that became part of her brand for decades. She's now embracing a natural dark brown shade, a symbol of her new, more grounded identity. There's no longer a pressure to look a certain way or perform a certain version of herself. These days, she dresses simply, keeps to herself, and blends in, just another person at the market or walking a dog down a country lane. Portia, always her anchor, has embraced the change too. The couple appears to be closer than ever, focusing on home, their animals, and their own private world. There's something poetic in their shift. Two people who once lived at the center of public fascination, now choosing silence over spectacle. Ellen isn't plotting a comeback. She's not chasing headlines or courting attention. For now, she's choosing rest, choosing reflection, choosing a life that allows her to heal from the whirlwind of the last 2 decades. And in many ways, that's the most surprising part of her story. Not the rise, not the fall, but the quiet decision to stop chasing and just be. She may not be the Ellen the world once knew, but perhaps, for the first time in her life, she's becoming someone even she can finally recognize. Do you miss the Ellen DeGeneres show? Tell us in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.